All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are now going to call to order a meeting of the MAG Management Committee. For all of you participating by Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all attendees. Phone participants should use *6 to mute or unmute and *9 to raise their hand. At this time, we'll have staff take a roll call to establish quorum.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Management Committee. I'll go down the list of names of those appearing virtually. Please unmute and indicate if you're here. Charlene Pania. Charlene Pania. Dan Cotterman. Carrie Dyrick. Amber Wakeman. Lisa Garcia. Grady Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Kathy Valenzuela.
Here.
Thank you. Kathleen Curley. Kevin Phelps. Jeff Kulaga.
Here.
Thank you. Matthew Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Rick Horst. Jill Kymack.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Barton. Leo Liu. Scott Smith. Thank you. And Jim Thompson. Bob Wingenroth.
Here.
Thank you. Reyes Medrano.
Here.
Thank you. Chief Brown. Gene Blackman.
Here.
Thank you. Jody Rooney.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Thank you.
Jennifer Jack.
Jennifer Jack. Thank you. We have quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. On February 1st, Buckeye City Manager Roger Klingler retired. We want to thank Roger for his service and welcome Dan Cotterman, who was appointed as Buckeye City Manager on February 15th. Right, welcome aboard. All right, moving on to item number 2, call to the audience. Members of the public were asked to submit written comments for this meeting through the MAG website. Comments may be sent at any time leading up to the meeting, but must be received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, or that are on the agenda for discussion, not for action. MAG staff, have we received any public comments? If so, read them at this time.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Management Committee. We received one public comment for consent agenda item 4F. I will begin comment.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, it comes from. Where's the name? Sorry, the name is Diane Barker. And she is asking, is the regional transportation program with its projects and services estimated to today's 2022 inflation basis? And she's requesting that the chair direct staff to respond to her question. Thank you. And to comment.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead, move to item 3, the Executive Director's Report, and Eric Anderson is here for that report. Maybe you can also answer the public comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Management Committee. The answer to the question is the dollar figures in the Transportation Improvement Program are all in inflated dollars, so they're in year of expenditure dollars. So I want to thank you all for those who showed up in person. Thank you all for showing up virtually too. 2 years ago was our last in-person Management Committee meeting, believe it or not. So the MAG staff went out virtually March 17th of 2020. So just 2 years. So just amazing. It's nice to see everybody in person again. So as we transition back to our so-called new normal, whatever that means in the future, we'll wait and see. But anyway, thank you all. A couple of things that I want to bring to your attention. There was a Supreme Court ruling on the Pinal County Regional Transportation Authority tax that came out yesterday. Although I think the legal experts are still trying to decipher it, I think one of the findings was that the tax is invalid, I think was what the Supreme Court ruled. So what action is going to be required by Pinal County to rectify that? Stay tuned. So once again, given the growth of Pinal County, that was a very important funding source for infrastructure improvement. So more to come on that, certainly. We go to the next slide. Our crossing guard training workshops, crossing guard training in this region has actually been going on for almost 50 years. City of Phoenix started this program. MAG took it over 17 years ago, and it really relies on volunteers from our member agencies. And so due to a number of retirements and reassignments, we've lost some of our volunteers who have been very helpful for this program. So we're reaching out to our member agencies to find more volunteers. Since we announced this at Regional Council last month, we have received 2 from Phoenix and 2 from Glendale, so we really appreciate that. But we're going to continue to look for additional volunteers. So we'll be reaching out to members to see if we can identify a little bit more help for that program. The crossing guard training, we've trained anywhere from 300 to 600 crossing guards every year. And it's a very important program. Training usually occurs in August, so we have some time to get resources in place. So, Mr. Chair, that completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Feel free to contact Eric after the meeting if you have any additional questions. We'll now move on to item 4. Our next item is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 4A through 4J are on the consent agenda. Does any member of Management Committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing and seeing none, could I then have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Got a motion made by Mr. Wright, seconded by Mr. Brady. I'll go ahead this time. It's close. And could I go ahead and have a voice vote of those in the room? Just those in the room in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we'll take a roll call vote of those virtually participating.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Management Committee, I'll go down the list of names of those participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Grady Miller.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Valenzuela.
Aye.
Thank you. Jeff Kulaga.
Aye.
Thank you. Matthew Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Jill Kymack.
Aye.
Thank you. Jennifer Jack.
I'm present in the room.
Thank you.
But I,
Bob Wingenroth.
Aye.
Thank you. Reyes Medrano.
Aye.
Thank you. Jean Blackman.
Aye.
Thank you. Jody Rooney.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Now moving on to item 5. It is support for raise grant applications presented by MAG Transportation Improvement Program Supervisor Patrick Stone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Management Committee. Pleasure to be with you. This item is on the agenda for action. If I could get the next slide, please. So on January 28th of this year, USDOT issued a notice of funding opportunity for the fiscal year 2022 raise grants. Raise grants were actually one of the first grant programs that have been issued as part of the new infrastructure bill. As noted, there's a $1.5 million available through a very competitive merit-based application process. On the slide, you can see both the eligible applicants and the eligible projects. And I want to note the funding is divided equally between both rural grants and urban grants at $750 million each. For urban grants, the award size is between 5 and 25 million. Please note 20% local match requirement. And urban grants are those defined within the large urbanized areas. So if you're thinking of the Phoenix Mesa urbanized area. Second, rural grants award sizes between 1 and 25 million. There could be a reduced match requirement at the discretion of the Secretary of the USDOT. And of course, these are located outside of the large urbanized area. And the one thing I did want to note, and this is a change from the previous grant cycle for the 2021 raise grants, planning grants of which at least 75 million will be awarded now follow the same grant thresholds as both urban and rural grants. So a minimum grant size for urban is 5 million, a minimum grant size for rural would be 1 million. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take you through the capital grant submissions. There's 4.5 capital grants. We'll get to one at the end. So the first is the City of Glendale. This would construct various pedestrian and ADA improvements within central Glendale between Bethany Home Road and Northern, and then between 51st and 67th Avenue. The city is, the total project cost for the city, 9.6 million. They're requesting just under 8 million in raise grant funding. Next project is for Maricopa County. This is for a bridge crossing on Patton Road over the Hassayampa River. The county is requesting a $42.4 million project of which 25 million in raise grant funding. Next slide. I do like this one. So the city of Mesa has a project, the Pecos Industrial Rail Access and Train Extension, or PIRATE project. This would construct approximately 6 miles of new freight rail within the city of Mesa. The total project cost just under 106 million. Again, they're asking for the maximum raise grant award of 25 million. And then finally, on the capital grants, the city of Phoenix has the bicycle and pedestrian bridge over the Rio Salado at 3rd Street, a $35 million project with a $25 million grant request. Moving on. Oh, I apologize. Did have one more capital grant. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. There was also a project for the city of Scottsdale. This is the 2nd Street complete street improvements down in Old Town Scottsdale. The city is looking to do pedestrian enhancements in downtown Scottsdale at 19.2 million. Of that, 14.4 million would be the grant request. Next slide, please. So there is one design grant that was submitted for the city of Maricopa. It's for the Sonoran Ridge Desert Parkway. This would be for the 2nd phase of design on that corridor between Porter and Fuqua roads. Total project cost 6.3 million. They're asking for 5 million in raise grant funding. And then finally, this could have been in this section, this could have been in the capital section. So the city of Surprise is asking for both design and construction. So this is a combination grant, and this is for a bridge crossing of the McMicken Dam. They also want to do the first phase of transportation, or a TI at the Loop 303. Total project costs 25 million. The grant request is just under 20 million. Next slide, please. So next steps, where do we go from here? As you can see on the slide, the raise grant applications are due to USDOT by 5 p.m. Eastern time on April 14th. Member agencies are seeking letters of support from MAG to include in those applications. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the requested action is to recommend approval to support these raise grant applications. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be available for any comments.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there any questions or comments from membership?
Andrew?
Go ahead.
That's what Patrick, I just want to make sure, is there a connection to Pirates and City of Mesa? Is that what I heard today? Is that the,
I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but I may have a large pirate
We're
flag.
looking
at
for
home.
the treasure
looking for the treasure now?
for the
Okay.
3rd time. Is this our 3rd round?
I do believe this is
Yes.
the 3rd request from the city.
It's our 3rd venture.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Anyone appearing virtually have any questions or comments?
My question, if this is your 3rd, have you thought about maybe changing the acronym a bit? Perhaps this isn't selling quite as much, Mr. Brady.
That's
I
a
wanna
good-
consider
that's-
that.
It's a very good point.
Just a point, okay. That's all, Mr. Chair.
But you're always going to remember it regardless.
This is true.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve this item. to move
Very good.
forward.
And I will second it.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Everyone in the room in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we'll take the roll call vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Management Committee, I'll go down the list of names of those appearing virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Grady Miller.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Valenzuela.
Aye.
Thank you. Jeff Kulaga.
Aye.
Thank you. Matthew Williams. Thank you. Jill Kymack.
Aye.
Thank you. Bob Wingenroth.
Aye.
Thank you. Reyes Medrano.
Aye.
Thank you. Jean Blackman.
Aye.
Thank you. Jody Rooney. Is there anyone that I missed? Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Now move on to item 6. It's the 2022 point in time homeless counts results presented by MAG Regional Homeless Program Manager Nikki Stevens.
Hello, Chairman and members of the Management Committee. Thank you for having me here today. I'm here to present on the Maricopa County point in time count for 2022. Pinal County did not participate in the January 25th point in time count because they are under a different continuum of care. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this count, it is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And the point in time count is done across the country in the last 10 days of January. We did choose January 25th as our day. The count offers us valuable data, and this data allows us to understand the subpopulations that exist within the homeless response system. But it is just one data point, and there are limitations, and we'll talk about those later on in my presentation. Next slide, please. Here, I'd like to convey in this timeline just the amount of planning that goes into the point in time count. It's well over 5 months of planning. And this includes working with the point in time count coordinators from the different towns and cities across the region. And this includes also volunteer training, the trainer that's done by myself and staff. And we follow the same protocols and preparation every year, including how to ensure data quality for all the surveys completed. Next slide, please. As you can see, we had well over 500 volunteers, which I think is amazing because this is during the Omicron surge. And we had so many people wanting to participate. We had community members reaching out to myself and staff asking how they could participate. So I thought it really conveyed the importance of this point in time count. You know, we were nervous that we were not going to get enough volunteers, but as you see, we've had enough volunteers to cover the entire region and all the grids that we needed to. The coordinators were able to have more than enough, and the count was a success because of all the volunteers that was due to the point in time count coordinators who assisted in getting them all trained and ready to go. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over really quickly the methodology, which is kind of complicated, but hopefully I can convey it in a way that's understandable. So this year's point in time count was completely paperless, which was the first time was 100% paperless. And it was conducted on a mobile app that was developed by our regional analytics team. The mobile app ensured every submitted survey had a location attached to it and improved data collection quality with a built-in logic. The spatial quality assurance and quality control and deduplication efforts are well underway. The surveys that were observations are difficult to deduplicate, and we are working through any issues discovered through the quality assurance, quality control process with each of the cities. On the day of the point in time count, coordinators had access to a dashboard for real-time monitoring of the data and review of the submitted surveys. We checked data integrity, making sure that there were no issues with the data collection. And overall, the feedback has been great about the mobile app. I give a lot of credit to our regional analytics team. They've done an amazing job to make the mobile app really easy to use. Next slide, please. So how we use this data, the data that's collected from the cities and towns is to understand the subpopulations such as families, youth, veterans, and any other, LGBTQ plus. So it helps us with planning purposes and to gauge what gaps currently exist. It also helps us to connect with the people that are experiencing homelessness on the day of the count to get them connected to our homeless response system, which I think is extremely important. Next slide, please. So how does the point in time count fit into our larger regional action plan? This data will assist us with identifying the needs of the subpopulations such as families, youth, and veterans. It will also help us to understand the need for additional permanent housing, as well as temporary housing such as shelter beds in each community. We will have a progress report out next month on where we are at and to convey what is still needed from the communities across the region. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, there are benefits and limitations to the point in time count. Obviously, the benefits are that it brings in tens of millions of dollars to our community, well over $31 million that comes into Maricopa County alone, that serves 31 projects and our planning grant dollars as well for the continuum of care. These dollars support agencies across the region. And the limitations are, a few. So the families and youth who have been historically difficult to capture in the point in time count due to hotel hopping and couch surfing, that has been for years a difficult population to actually capture and account for. But this year we did make a concerted effort to work with the Family Housing Hub on the priority 1 and priority 2 families that are unsheltered so that we can get the most accurate information possible and report it back. And we know that families historically, are undercounted in the count every single year. Also, we work directly with the home-based youth services to ensure that we are getting the youth counted as well this year in the point in time count. We also know this is only one data source. We use other resources in our community, such as the by name list, the homeless management information system, to give us a more robust picture of homelessness in our community. We are currently working to have a full report with additional information on the sheltered population as well. So once we have the sheltered population, we'll include that in the unsheltered count and also additional demographic information about the populations in our homeless response system. Next slide, please. So here's some considerations for 2022. We knew that there was going to be an increase is over 2 years. As you know, we did not have the point in time count in 2021 due to COVID. But since 2020, we did see an 18% increase. And for the last 7 years, the data trends have still continued to see an increase of people experiencing homelessness. And we anticipated the numbers were going to go up. So this is nothing that we were not anticipating seeing. And there are multiple factors that contribute to this. Every community is seeing low income families hit by the rental market. They're being priced out of rental units. These families are hit the hardest, and we're not necessarily seeing them in the eviction data, but we are seeing it in the non-renewal of leases and the increase of rents. With having the point in time count done entirely paperless, it has allowed us to get the results for the unsheltered count out to communities quicker than ever before. It also allows us to have a more precise way of understanding the data that is provided in our community. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, the press release will come out on March 11th. We will develop a full report with the sheltered and unsheltered count and an understanding of the subpopulations, as well as the demographic information such as race, ethnicity, age of the populations that are unsheltered and sheltered. We will analyze the count in the context of our homeless management information system as well. And we will plan for enhancements next year, making sure that we are doing a better job on the observation tool and ensuring that we are not counting the same people twice, and the timing of the data release. This year, we wanted to provide the unsheltered data to communities earlier than previous years, which had required a hand count of thousands and thousands of paper surveys. And I could not imagine how difficult that had been in the past. So this is great that we are able to provide the information so quickly. We also will look at the homeless management information system again in the context of the larger point in time count. Next slide, please. I just wanted to thank the city managers for allowing your staff the time to work with us to get this point in time count to be as successful as it is, and I'm grateful for your amazing point in time count coordinators as well. For without them, this point in time count wouldn't have been a success and we wouldn't have had as many volunteers as we did have across the region. Next slide, please. So here's my contact information, and please feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on the MAG staff if you'd like to, if you have additional questions or you'd like to meet with the team to talk about your data, we're here to help. And also if you have suggestions on how we can make the point in time count better next year, we are completely open to that as well. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Nikki. Questions from membership?
Andrew.
Go ahead, Mr. Brady.
First of all, Nikki, let me just express appreciation to you and your staff, MAG, for putting this together. This is just a critical effort that across the entire area. I know it's a big initiative, big effort in Mesa. I think we had most of our city council members out there and staff. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for organizing it. And there's probably no perfect way to do this. It's just unimaginable how to go out and do this. But I think from what the feedback I get, it's still very coordinated, very, very pleased. But just a few questions that have come up. And again, this is more just observation and maybe just a response and create the dialogue. There was some concern maybe about how the volunteers were deployed and the concern about duplication of areas and counting that. How does your process try to manage that to avoid that from happening and kind of get me kind of respond to that? Because I've heard that not in a gross way, but just the concern that might have happened. And how are there ways to try to manage that, or what's your thoughts on that?
So there's a couple of things. The point in time count coordinators have the grids for each of their cities, and they deploy their volunteers into each of those grids. And on the survey, there is a question that's asked, have you been surveyed today?
Okay.
And if somebody answers yes, then
Okay.
we do not survey them. If
So-
they answer no, then we continue.
Okay,
to
so
survey.
Nikki, even the concern, because I know I've done this as I've done ride-alongs with my police department. At beginning of the shift, we know where a lot of individuals might be. They're homeless. By the end of the shift, we know they're not in that same place or somewhere else. So, but by asking that question, even if they were counted in one part of the grid early on in the process, and they may have moved to somewhere else, theoretically, if they're asking that question, we avoid that duplication.
Yes.
Okay, because this population will move from bus shelters to other locations even during those mornings. Okay, and there's just one thought, and again, this just goes to my anecdotal experience that you kind of listed some of the thoughts about causation of homelessness. And I think one of the things we need to keep just talking about is a couple of things. One is drug abuse, right? We're just the drugs, the impact it has on and really putting people in a position where they just can't take care of themselves. They lose the desire to really do that, and they end up on the streets. And then behavior or mental health, right? And I guess I wish when we have these conversations about what are some solutions or ways to mitigate against homelessness, we can't forget, in my mind, I mean, economic is certainly one of those. I'm not trying to, rents going up and paying utilities. I think that's a concern for families, but my experience is the majority of, at least in Mesa, majority of our homeless population are single men, and they have they're either drug abusers or there's a mental health component to that. That's predominant. That's not every case, but just seems to be the experience. And it just seems like I'd like to see, as we kind of talk about how we're going to address those seem to be topics that, I don't know, we don't seem to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what can we do as a region to deal with those directly, because I think there's a direct link between that and homelessness. But anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you for what you do. Appreciate the work. And we look forward to, as we get more of that granular information and trying to work and put it into the regional homeless plan. I think that's a great idea. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Other questions? Anyone on the Zoom call who has any questions? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you again, Nikki. This item is on the agenda for information discussion only. So thank you for that. Next, we'll move on to item 7, which is an update on MAG emerging technology efforts presented by MAG Director of Transportation Technologies and Services, Vladimir Livshitz, and also Emergency Technology Program Manager, Shu Yao Hong.
And we presented just a few first pilots that were initiated. We also issued a solicitation to management committee for expression of interest to conduct technology pilots. So one of the main motivations for us, as we spoke about it, was to actually conduct real technology deployments in the field that are ready for the field, and that can make potentially a big impact and potentially are scalable for the region. So since then, of course, a lot has changed, and even though COVID did slow us down, but we successfully completed the program and first round of it, and now want to provide update of the results. Next slide, please. The way we started back then was we set up a public university task force. A number of professors from ASU, UFA, and NAU worked with us. They help us to not only to identify technology directions, but also come up with at least initial some kind of methodology how we'll be approaching this issue. And also, least but not very important aspect is that they help us to evaluate technology pilots. All of them signed conflict of interest forms and did a number of other contractual arrangements, funded differently and independently from the pilots themselves. And they looked at the technology pilots, worked very closely with us and vendors, and provided independent evaluation of the technology deployments. By the way, all the pictures that you see on this slide, that's pictures of our pilots, actually, real pilots. You can see Shuyao here on one of the pictures. The previous picture was from one of the deployments. Next slide, please. We also took a comprehensive look of what's happening in the region back then. We issued Smart Region Report, which is still on our website. Of course, a lot has changed again, like it was more than 2 years ago. But we identified all relevant initiatives back then in the region. We plan to update this report, and also mapped out some directions and how we'll be approaching this effort. Next slide, please. We also took a look around the nation in the United States, but also overseas, what is happening and how large MPOs, cities, DOTs approaching this issue. And we did a fairly large survey back then, conducting long interviews. We wanted to make sure that we can capitalize on the best experiences across the country. We found, maybe not surprisingly, that piloting technology is a very common direction. Also, what some people is calling switchboards, and in San Diego they were doing, in some other places, matching vendors and their proposed technologies and initiatives with the needs of their member agencies, with the needs of the cities, and MPOs were kind of playing a role of facilitating these interactions and making sure that they can accelerate technology deployments. Next slide, please. Of course, since back then, we were just working on the regional transportation plan on momentum. Now we have the plan in place. So it guides our future directions for these technology deployments. We have two main goals. If one of them is to support the implementation of the regional plan and the goals identified in the regional plan. You might remember that one of the main programmatic areas explicitly identified in the plan is emerging technologies. So we want to make sure that we're ready for this programmatic area. We put our processes in place. We accumulated sufficient experience for different level of funding if it comes our way. And another as important goal is providing relevant services to our member agencies. So we work with many of you already. So we had dozens of pilots at this point, and we pretty much see like a large interest from jurisdictions across the valley in the region, and not only from the vendors, of course, but also from DOTs and local governments. Next slide, please. The way we set it up back then, and it pretty much stays still the same, and we'll talk about next steps later, was we emerging technology pilots was in the center of our actual field activities. We had a public university task force that helped us to develop scopes and evaluate the pilots. We received a lot of interest from MAC members, but also a lot of new technologies came to light through the interactions with vendors and consultants. So again, this kind of switchboard idea at the top. And we back then we aimed for to assist the development of the new regional plan. Just again, by way of a reminder, originally this effort was funded at 800,000 from the sales tax fund. Due to the original large interest and success when we just started, this actually we had a lot of pilots in the pipeline, and these funds went very quickly. So a regional council amended this effort, and we added 650,000 to the original pilot program. For this fiscal year 2022-2023, what we have right now in the work program is $1 million. And also, as I mentioned, there is a separate funding for the public university task force. Again, like important to say that they very actively participate and work with the vendors and the agency. It's not just evaluation, but a variety of all kind of different tasks. Next slide, please. Back then, we got a great response and to our advertisement, but at this point, I want show you how to dig into a little bit more details where we stand right now and how it goes. Yeah.
Thanks, Fabio. Mr. Chair and members of Management Committee, we received strong interest from the private sector as well. We were successful even with our first advertisement back in 2019 that resulted in a large and diversified pool of qualified consultants under this program, as shown here, including engineering consultants, OEM and telecom providers, as well as new startups and new vendors. In addition, some of the prime consultants also bring in various sub-consultants under their team to further enhance the technology options that we have under this program to pilot. Next slide, please. The map here provides a quick glance of piloting efforts to date. Despite the pandemic, we have executed 13 different technology pilots across the region in red color, and many more are in the pipeline on the initiation and the planning stages. We also got a good diversification of pilots by different technologies, by different application and use case, such as ITS, safety and planning, and also by different modes of travels. We also got a very good geographic distribution of pilots across the region as well, as shown here. Next slide. This table presents the partners involved in each of the executive pilot. As you can see here, almost all the pilots involve assembling a large team of member agencies, consultants and vendors, academias, which demonstrate the need for close coordinations and collaborations among the team members, but also pose contractual and logistic challenges as well. Furthermore, I want to appreciate all the member agencies who champion these pilots, assisting us from the scoping to implementations and deployments to providing feedback for the pilots for the evaluation as well. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to add a few more words about technical implications and results here of the pilots, although many of them are still ongoing. And I cannot go into details here for obvious reasons, but I want to pick some examples to show you the highlights of the pilot's results. So first of all, through the piloting efforts, we found out the vehicle trajectory data and crowd source data are mature and ready for various planning, safety, and operations applications. And those efforts actually are going mainstream now in terms of technology applications. And secondly, our pilots also identify mature computer vision technologies that can be applicable for various ITS and safety applications, notably such as for pedestrian counting and detection efforts at the intersections. With that, I will transfer it back to Vladimir. I do want to add that we are happy to provide more details to any interested members for the follow-up. And more information will be posted to our the program webpage on MAG website once it's launched. And with that, I will transfer back to Vladimir to cover the policy implication and next steps.
Thank you, Shao. Yeah, and some of you might remember that actually results of some of these pilots, they made wave across the country. We were featured in the FHWA DC program and a number of other places. You might have seen something in the news as well. So some of the results were very exciting. And actually, we also reflected some of the results in our planned this next fiscal year large data collection projects as well, to reflect basically new technologies in our methods of data collection and analytics. Next slide, please. So Xiao talked about technical results of the pilots, and there are many. There are huge reports, like, you know, one pilot can, if you really dig in, it can generate like 100 pages report if produced by UFA, and it's really for professionals in the field to look into it. But also there are very clear policy implications that also lead us to some next steps that I will talk about on the next slide. One of them that once you start actually doing this type of efforts in the field, you realize that nothing is either perfect or completely imperfect. All of the pilots, they have strong areas and they have areas where they struggle, all technologies. And actually deployment of the pilots should be done very thoughtfully. For example, for traffic control optimization, you need to really think about what corridors, what type of technology you're deploying there. But again, results are very promising. We also found that boundaries between use cases and applications area are very blurred now. Same hardware and software solutions can be used for multiple use cases, and it's really hard to distinguish. So basically, many vendors are approaching us and they're trying. Probably many of you heard this very common questions from vendors. What are your needs? Tell us about your needs. And based on what you tell them, they tailor their solutions to your needs and offer this type of deployment. One critical thing that I cannot just stress enough is having champions in jurisdictions. And vendors apparently they're interested, and it's a very beneficial marketing probably effort for them. And the great testing also of their technologies. But without champions, what our experience shows, it's impossible to achieve success. Somebody from a local government, from DOT, should be pushing these pilots forward. And there is this sometimes illusion that good technology will speak for itself and propagate. That's not the case. So if there's no support for technology, even good technologies can die, and we have many examples of those. So having champions is critical. Communications, Shriel, on one of the previous slides, he showed how many partners you need to make the pilot successful. It's vendors, it's jurisdictions, it's DOTs, it's many other partners. We have very strong partnerships with some other public-private partnership. IM is a good example, very productive cooperation. So it's, of course, it's great, but it's also has its implications. So this kind of coordination should be planned for. Frequent communication is the key, and minimization of assumptions. So we need to keep the pulse on the pilot all the time. And one of the things that we have not been doing so far, but it's really, I'm sure it will be of interest for this committee, is socioeconomic evaluation of piloting results. Many vendors move ahead, and they already show dollar figures, what will happen if you deploy to certain scales their technologies. But we would like to have our own independent evaluation and our own numbers in this regard. So that's where we're moving also. Next slide, please. So talking about next step, in our current work program, we already budgeted this $1 million for ongoing support for member agencies and continuing this pilots effort. And there are many more expressions of interest. We have a long pipeline of pilots that we would love to do. But we need to find a permanent home for this emerging technology program. The program is relatively new. When we started this on-call for emerging technology pilots, we did not have emerging technology program back then. So now we have a new plan. We have the program in place, which is right now just Shuyao. And we need to find a permanent home in terms of either a new committee, working group of a committee, or some of the committees, and that's something that we will be looking in the future for direction from you. Under the guidance of this body, we would like to transition from a proof of concept approach to something more stable, more robust, and criteria-based selection process. We actually have draft criteria that we developed at MAC with our performance measurement program, and we've kind of been applying it, but we want to go through the committee process for that. And also, we'll be looking for this body to help us develop emerging technology program policy, procedures, and expand this work through the cooperation with Public University Task Force and a member agency. So that's all in our plans. Next slide, please. So that's conclude our presentation. We'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. Thank you, Shu Yao, for the very thorough presentation. Just real quick question. In terms of completed, ongoing, and about to start pilots, how many total are you managing right now or have managed?
Well, Shu Yao mentioned, I believe we have like 13 pilots right now that is completed or ongoing or close to completions. And we have probably, we have about, I would say close maybe to 10 pilots in kind of planning stages. Okay. And we have pilots in the ideation stage that basically we're discussing them with our partners. And that's many more. Some of them will never materialize, of course. So it's a cone shape, right? So we'll see. It's impossible to say sometimes, like we need this convergence of interest from everybody, right? For the pilot to be successful or at least to get deployed. So again, like it's pilots, right? It's not all of them guarantee success. If you know they absolutely will be successful, it's not a pilot anymore. So
appreciate that. No, thank you. Questions from membership?
Chairman.
Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm curious, how does a pilot become initiated? Is it initiated by the community, by MAG, by the vendor? How does a project become one of the pilot projects?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's a very good question, and actually it can come to fruition in different ways. One of the ways, exactly as you mentioned, is that a jurisdiction, a city, a DOT might approach us and say, like, have you looked into this particular technology, or have you worked with this particular vendor? And that's how it started. It's also a lot of them coming actually from vendors' marketing efforts, quite frankly. So vendors, some of them very proactive, and they approach cities, they approach us, they approach everybody they can approach, trying to demonstrate their products, their services, their offerings. And that's how they can be, very often they approach a city, for example, and then this city vendor team comes to us and said, can we help them to bring this pilot to life? Because one of our goals is really to accelerate technology deployment, make it easy for our members. We do all the contractual work, which is absolutely not trivial. It's a huge challenge, actually. We pay for it to the degree possible, right? And we also manage the project, essentially. So, and lastly, the last, but I think this kind of initiation source will increase in the future, is from the Public University Task Force. So professors are continuously on kind of outlook for new promising technologies and developments, and they come to us and they might bring something to light that we want to pursue.
Chairman.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you for the presentation. I am the West Valley representative on the executive committee for the Connective, and I'm seeing a lot of overlap in some of the activities that are taking place, including pilots and the coordination with the universities. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to make a presentation to that leadership council the next time that they meet on the efforts that you're doing in order to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. Yeah, no problem at all.
Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
That was kind of my question, because we had this conversation at Apache Junction, right? Is it called the Connective? The Connective and this effort. So Eric, you know, it's coming to you. So help me, because I'm still trying to figure out all these things you're doing or not doing or kind of doing. So how does this relate to that? And I know we've got we're kind of in transitions at the Connective. Is that fair? If this were to come to MAG, is this I mean, what's the difference between, let's just start with, what's different what the connective does and what this is doing first, and then maybe to this point of how do we connect them together?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the Management Committee, Mr. Brady, the Emerging Technology Program that we started actually predates the Connective by a little bit anyway. And when we started the Emerging Technology Program, as Latimer mentioned, it was designed to separate the poser technologies from the real technologies out there, quite frankly, and identifying the technology that we could scale. But that effort was really focused on transportation because that's what we do, and that's where the funding was coming from. Connective is a broader organization. They're taking a broader look at technology across a lot of different subject areas. There obviously is an intersection of those common elements, and so we understand that, number one, and we're actually a founding member of the Connective too, so we're kind of on the inside of that. The Connective is looking at more sustainable home for the Connective, I guess, is maybe the way to term it. So we are involved in those discussions now. And one of the concerns we have, quite frankly, is to make sure that what we're doing is not duplicative of what the Connective's doing, that we can find the synergy between those two programs and coordinate. If the Connective is within MAG, hypothetically, then obviously those efforts would be merged with this too. And so we'd have everything would merge together and it had a broader focus. One of the other aspects that I think is important too, the Connective, which was part of the PEI, which is a GPEC organization, if you will, is a lot more focused on the marketing side of things, I think, and really positioning the region as a smart region. We're actually down in the weeds on a lot of these technologies. Once again, because of our transportation focus, that's allowed us to really focus that effort. And so I think that one of the observations that I can make on the Connective also is that I think it needs to be focused too more on scalable technologies. And once again, new organizations like Connective, I think it's in 2 years now, 3 years, something like that. And they've had some change in leadership in the organization too. But I think it's important that the Connective's efforts be well coordinated with our member agencies too. And so that's one of the attractive things about MAG because of our relationship with our member agencies. So how this is going to play out, don't know yet. We certainly will continue to look for synergies between the two organizations in any case, and then we'll look and see if it makes sense to house the Connective here or whether it needs to be housed somewhere else.
Thank you, Eric. I just would say what I really appreciate about this presentation is I did like the idea. It's kind of like the laboratory, right? Where you kind of sort through, just like you said, we were getting bombarded, whether it's from vendors or council members going to NLC or whatever it might be, right? That come back and having the ability to kind of a process where we can work these ideas and concepts through and evolve them to pilot programs and then see if they're scalable, whether it's transportation or any other technology. I would just say I really appreciated the model that you all have developed on the transportation side. And I think it would be applicable that we could figure out a way to apply that to other areas. So I'm interested as this conversation continues about emerging technologies that we figure out a way to, I think you guys have a really good thing going here and maybe we could figure out how to, again, bring in some of these other interests. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Eric. Any other comments or questions? Anyone on the virtual call? Questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Moving on to item 8. It's a legislative update. MAG Policy and Government Relations Director Nathan Pryor will give this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Management Committee. Brief update today. First on the federal side at 1:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We did see the post of the $1.5 trillion omnibus appropriations package in Congress posted online. There was quick movement overnight on that. So we are still going through that, looking into impacts to the region, not just in transportation, but more broadly on issue areas of MAG in terms of policy programmatics. So more to come on that. Also on the state side, of course, running our companion bill, Senate Bill 1356, sponsored by Senator Pace, and House Bill 2598, sponsored by Representative Carroll. Seeing a quick movement on our Senate bill, pending vote on to go into the Senate floor. We continue to work with leadership, both in House and Senate, and bill sponsors, mapping a path forward and discussions with particular House leadership on how to move that forward. So a lot going on there. Hopefully we'll have some positive news to report very shortly. So our efforts continue. Do want to thank, of course, you member agencies reaching out to your respective legislators. Thank you for that. And of course, thank you to our business community, bill sponsors, Senate and House leadership offices, and helping map a path forward. So, Mr. Chairman, brief update today. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Nathan. Questions or comments? Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, members of the Management Committee, just on the note on the extension, we're pretty confident that we'll be successful in getting the extension bill through this year, and which will lead to a November 2022 vote. But part of what we have to do is also look at the risks of that not happening. And so one of the things we're looking at now, and don't want to make people too nervous, but because some of the activities that we have right now are for projects that are dependent upon the extension being in place, it may be prudent financially, if we're not going to have a 2022 vote, to slow those activities down. For example, we have significant design work underway, ADOT does, for State Route 30 and for the 303 extension. And so with any delays, and this is why we wanted a 2022 vote, so those efforts, so we could move into construction fairly quickly once an extension's in place. And so once again, we'll be looking at, we're not proposing anything today, but we'll see kind of what happens in the legislative session. And if we have to take some action subsequent to that, depending on kind of what happens in the legislature, we'll be back to you on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Julie?
Thank you. And kind of to that point, there was a date I thought we had to have that legislation through in order to get on the November 22 ballot. So I'm curious what that is, just so I can watch that and see if it crosses the finish line. But also, Eric, to your point, if it doesn't go in November of 22, when does it go? And I'm not sure I'm following exactly why we'd slow down projects unless we assumed that it wasn't going to be approved or considered for approval in a time. Because if Prop 400 is extended at any point in time, those projects would continue to move. So I guess I'd like a little bit more understanding on that.
Well, I think it's important that we let this legislative session play out, because once again, there's so much uncertainty. There's the politics in the legislature this year is unlike many have ever seen before. And so once again, I think that I don't want to make people too nervous right now, but if it's a November 2024 vote, that's one thing. If we get, we have this is an election year too, so we don't know what the composition of the legislature is going to be next year either. It's tough enough now. And so once again, these are some of the considerations we're looking at right now. And again, we don't want to be spending money that we can't actually capitalize on in terms of that continued investment in transportation. And quite frankly, it also sends a signal that how important that extension is too, which I think everybody in this room understands that. But unfortunately, some people in the legislature may not quite have an appreciation for that.
To just clarify, so if it doesn't go November of 22, we have to wait until November of 24. There's no options for different election cycles, whether it be March, May, or even November of 23.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Cairns, if not 22, let me back up to your earlier question. So regarding calling a ballot, that's obviously done through Maricopa County, working with them. If memory serves correct, it's they need to know in a June timeframe. That's why we have an emergency clause provision in our legislation to move that quickly. in terms of enactment and get that over to the county so they can call the vote. Barring that, let's say if there's a scenario where emergency clause is removed, of course, that's a lower threshold in terms of vote counts needed, but puts in a November 22 ballot into jeopardy. So potentially looking at maybe a spring of 23, for example.
Just in the context of the Prop 400 discussions, when we did the legislation for that, however, we were proposing a May 2004 election, and we got pushed to the general election because they wanted to make sure there was big turnout. And so, once again, that's the dynamic we're faced with the legislature. It's not necessarily up to us to say we want to have the vote on this particular day. They may push us to a big general election cycle like 2024. Don't know, but that's just one of the options that we have to look at.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online? Okay, thanks, Nathan. Item 9 is a request for future agenda items. Are there any requests for future agenda items for membership? Okay. Hearing none. Are there any comments or announcements for membership? I'll just say it's nice to be back in the building. It's been a while. It's good to see people not on a screen. And I hope more of our colleagues can join us in the next coming meetings. It'd be great to see you. At this point, hearing nothing else, business is now concluded. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.